Decades ago, I started growing food in my front and backyard, and I realized that my mission in life is to inspire and empower others to grow their own nutrient-dense, healthy organic food. Because of this, a lot of people have come to me with their gardening questions over the years, and that got me thinking, what if we put together a community that would help budding gardeners blossom? So I finally made the idea a reality with my Urban Farm U member program. Each month, your membership includes 3 live online events, a monthly class, a chit-chat with an expert, and a monthly coaching session, plus access to the experts on our member page and a significant discount on our signature courses. I'm deeply committed to transforming our global food system, and I do this by empowering you to grow your own food. The Urban Farm membership program is a simple way to get going. Please join me in transforming your food system today. To learn more, go to urbanfarmmembership.org or text membership to 33444. That's urbanfarmmembership.org or text membership to 33444.
You're listening to the Urban Farm Podcast, your partner in the Grow Your Own Food revolution. Whether you've just been introduced to urban farming or you're a lifelong advocate, we're sure you'll leave feeling more informed, equipped, and empowered to dig deeper into the soil of your local food economy. With you every step of the way, here's your host, Greg Peterson.
Today on the Urban Farm Podcast, we have Morag to talk about her experience with permaculture living down under. Morag loves living a permaculture life. She is a passionate permaculture teacher, an experienced designer, a permaculture blogger and filmmaker, a regular feature writer for the Australian Permaculture magazine, and correspondent for the new ABC Living and Permaculture radio show. She lives in Crystal Waters, a permaculture village in the hinterland of the Sunshine Coast with her husband and young family, who she homeschools. They designed and built their eco home without going into debt, collect all their own water, deal with their own wastewater, and produce their own power. Morag loves teaching from her gardens. In this educational space, she leads her Natural Kids programs, Young Ethos Scholar programs, Earth School camps for high school students, and the Permaculture Life Education Series for adults. Morag holds a Master's of Environmental Education, a postgraduate diploma of Landscape Architecture, and a Bachelor of Planning and Design. She has taught permaculture and community garden programs in over 20 countries over the last 20 years. She is the co-founder of the iconic Northeast Street City Farm in Brisbane and the Australian City Farms and Community Gardens Network. She has also supported the development of many school gardens, community gardens, and local food networks, both locally and internationally. Welcome to the show today, Morag.
So I was going to say good morning.
It is a good morning, absolutely, although it's afternoon here. And, well, hold on. Am I talking?
Start again, sorry. Can we just say, yeah, good day?
Oh, no, this is great. I'm talking to you from the future, right?
Yes, that's right.
Because you're in Australia.
Yes, I keep forgetting the time difference between us. I'm talking to you in the past, and my kids think that's absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, exactly. So I shared a bit about you in your bio. Can you fill in the blanks for us and share more about the path you took to get where you're at now?
Sure. I'm living here in an eco village, a permaculture village, and I feel like it's kind of a natural place for me to be based on, I suppose, my upbringing and the path I took through education and the mentors that have inspired me along the way. I actually grew up in sort of on the edge of a city in a suburban area, but it was a really green and natural place. And my parents were really focused on ethics and environmental justice and natural health, and all of those things kind of infused through my upbringing. Because when it was not cool to be a vegetarian, I was the kid at school with natural health. I was the kid with the black bread with the home crushed peanuts scraped on the bread,
right.
And I spent most of my childhood, I suppose, just playing out in nature, where it was a suburban area, but there was a lot of open space around and a lot of creeks that you could go down and explore the tadpoles, and we had chickens in the backyard and a little bit of growing, but it wasn't really a main sort of permaculture farm or anything. But and then in the summertime and all the holidays, I spent all the time down in this lake system, and I just absolutely loved being out and being free and just being connected to nature. And so I think as I grew up, I started to see some of the damage that was being caused and some of the things that were happening around me, and feeling really, I suppose, deeply pained by that as an adolescent. And,
absolutely.
And I think that in some ways started to activate, that activism in me that wanted to go, well, hang on a tick, that's not right.
Right.
And as a teenager, I ended up starting to get into things like various sorts of environmental protests but also peace rallies too, because at that time, I mean, I'm 47 now, so at that time there was just the birth of kind of the green movement in Australia. There was a big protest down around some beautiful rivers trying to prevent them from being dammed. At the same time, there was a lot of conversation around nuclear war and the threat of nuclear war. And also, similarly, in the early 70s, there was a period in Australia, and probably in the States as well, there was an oil shortage, and so there was a lot of conflict around that. And so all of these factors, I suppose, were around me and shaping my thinking around, well, if not that, then what? But it took me a while to really get to that point. I sort of was in that sort of rebellious stage as a teenager, first saying, stop the chopping of the forest and stop nuclear, all of those things. And I remember getting to a point when, I don't know, talking about that for a long time, and I would just see people start to glaze over, like, oh, here she goes again, and I realized that after a while that people don't really necessarily want to hear what's wrong all the time. Right. And it was another part of my upbringing was also about finding positive solutions. My dad was always talking, let's not let that get to us. Let's find some way we can move forward. And I guess that sort of came through, and I started thinking, well, if not that, then what? What if we want to find a way to not have to chop all the forests or dig up all the uranium or create conflict? What sort of society are we trying to actually create, and what do we need our society to look like? Right. Which is where I sort of started to head out on a bit of a pilgrimage around the world, sort of around university age, and I ended up in a place called Schumacher College in England, where it was a gathering place for amazing thinkers. And I got to that point because I was inspired by a guy called Fritjof Capra, a scientist, an author. He wrote The Tao of Physics and the Systems View of Life, and he was talking a lot about the ecological paradigm. And all of a sudden I started to discover there was actually a language and a whole body of work around the way that I was thinking and feeling. And so I was halfway through my university degree, and I was doing landscape architecture and environmental planning and design, and I just stopped, and I said, I think I need to go to this place over here. So I sold everything I had, and even the university was really supportive. They said, look, if you go over there, we'll pay you up front to come back and lecture about it back at the university, which was an amazing thing. And I think that kind of started my role as an educator too, because that thing about immediately going over and coming back and sharing, and I've tried to keep that pattern always going, but unfortunately I got there and found out how amazing it was and didn't come back for a very long time.
So hold on here. Where was there? That's what we got to know.
Schumacher College was in England. It's in the south part of England. It's this.
No, but that was the first place you started. Where did you leave there to go to?
I was at Melbourne University doing landscape architecture.
Very good.
Yes.
That's in the heart of permaculture.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. And so I got to this place, and I started to really fill my mind with all the ecological thinking that was the foundation, I think, for where a lot of the permaculture is at. And And I came across another woman called Helena Norberg Hodge who spent a lot of time in Ladakh and was talking about these sustainable communities and, on the other side of the Himalayas, and something about what she was speaking about drew me across to go and volunteer with her. And so I had this kind of filling up of my head with where all sustainable living needed to come from. And my heart was filled with the possibilities, because living out in Ladakh for about 6 months and actually seeing how people lived and understanding that you could live really deeply and connected with nature, that it wasn't just this fancy ideal that a lot of people were telling me, oh, that's just, that's not real, we live this way. And so all of a sudden I started to see, well, actually it is possible, like the thinking's there, the actuality's there. And I started to come back and go, well, what do I do back in Australia? How does it fit all of these ideas and all of this way? And that's when I started to bring back my interest in permaculture. My dad had always had the books out ever since they were first published, and I'd heard permaculture all the time. But it really wasn't until I guess I was ready for it that I launched into it. And so when I came back to Australia, really inspired, I found that became the platform, I suppose, to be able to really practically implement all these ideas. So it was there was this beautiful connection there between the head, heart, and finally the hands of, okay, now this is how to do it. So that's kind of a little bit of how I came to be where I was, I am.
And you live in a really, really cool place, some place I've fantasized about living for a very long time. Tell us about Crystal Waters.
Yeah, I've been here for about 18 years now.
Wow.
I can't believe it's actually been that long. I remember getting here so excited, and I was telling my friends, well, I've been at Crystal Waters for 3 months now. I was like really excited. And now, 18 years on, I'm still as excited about it, and I still absolutely love being here. So it's an eco-village. There's about 250 people who live here. It's designed on the principles of permaculture, the way that the landscape is set out, and it's embedded in our community ethics. And each of the households that's here is designed and in that way too. So, for example, just the way that the landscape is laid out, it was just all of the best agricultural land was set aside first, so that none of that was built on. And all of the northern slopes, so for us down here in the Antipodes, it's kind of the north slope is what you want, of course.
Right.
So we were all the houses are located on the northern slopes, because that gives good access for the sun, for naturally solar passive homes, but also your active solar systems and growing really good food. So every house is built in the right spot from the outset. Then all the other slopes are used for woodlots and forests, and most of the land is being regenerated. So the principles of permaculture are just, I could keep talking. Every single part of it has been designed and being evolved from that basis and the principles of permaculture. And then within that, we have 83 households here, and that takes up only 14% of the land. Each of us have about 1 acre as a family that we own as a freehold title, and that's only 14% is privately owned, and then 80% of the land is common land. So that's all of our forests and all of the dams and the river that flows around the edge, and all the roads and all the infrastructure is common property that we take care of together.
Right.
And then there's last little 6% of the land is managed by a community cooperative, which is the organisation which helps to support the social and economic activity of the village.
Wow. Yeah.
And there's all ages that live here, from newborns through to, I think one of the eldest residents is almost 90 now. I think at last count there was 16 different nationalities. We have people coming continuously from around the world to stay with us. So even though we're, in the countryside, I don't at all feel isolated. I mean, we're only an hour and a half from Brisbane, the major capital of our state.
Right.
So it's not that far out of the city, but we just have amazing forests surrounding us. It's a beautiful natural environment. But just getting back to the visitors from around the world, we get woofers coming from just everywhere. At the moment, we have a wonderful guy from Colombia, and I homeschool my kids, so it's a great way. So kids don't have to go to geography class. Every time a woofer comes through, we're learning about a different place and a culture, and they're studying Spanish, so they get to have, real hands-on conversation or practice with people. And I think for me too, one of the fantastic things about woofing and about being in a place like this and having people come continuously is that sharing of knowledge and ideas.
Yes.
One of my favorite sayings is, when you're green, you grow. When you're ripe, you rot. So when you think you know everything and you become the expert in the field and you're constantly just espousing stuff, you actually, forget to keep your mind open to new possibilities or new information or new ways of doing things. So I constantly see myself in a process of being green and being the novice, and in that way just always love to meet new people or hear different ways of doing things, or another way to use a plant, or another way to build a structure. And at the moment I'm getting very excited because one of the things that I find a little bit challenging, like, we're really good on the food. I produce all my energy here. I produce all my own, I collect all my own water, and I process all my waste on site. And I probably use about less than a one-person house of energy in terms of consumption in a normal household, and less than 10% of the water consumption of a standard household. All those things, I've done that really. That's fine, but transportation is our issue out here. We don't have any public transport, and so we're quite dependent on cars. So one of our little projects, and I've been talking to people around, and as this idea is bubbling up, and it's becoming one of my son's homeschool projects.
Oh, nice.
Is to we're going to get some plug-in electric vehicles that are solar powered. So we're collecting solar panels at the moment and finding some electric vehicles that we can connect it all up to, and at least within our local village, because even within here it's quite hilly, and it's 7 kilometres from one end to the other end, try and at least get cars out of Crystal Waters. So the young people can use bikes, but people who are getting a bit on sort of find that a bit challenging. So either having electric powered bicycles or electric types of cars that we can plug in down at the village, and then have another point up in town, which is our local town, Mullaney, which is a fabulous place in and of itself. It's got amazing co-ops and organic food co-ops and a local bank and all these sorts of things, to have set up something maybe in front of the local bank up there that you can plug in and get back home again.
Nice.
Anyway, so there's starting to bubble up new ideas about transportation. I love that thing about this. There's always a new possibility, always something, a new boundary to explore, or a new way to actually make the way that we're living even more sustainable. So I wouldn't say that, we live absolutely sustainable, but we're always thinking about how we can do it better and make changes, and as we're going through it, also share that out again. So every step along the way, we're sort of trying to bring as many different people and ideas and communities along the way with us. Yeah. It's great fun.
Beautiful. So you mentioned a term several times that I want to make sure that we touch on. You said woofers. And
woofers, yes.
So for those listeners that don't know what that is, will you share that?
Sure. Woof. It's not got anything to do with dogs. It's willing workers on organic farms. And it's an international movement of people who I've joined up as a host, and people join up as travelers. And so essentially people come from all around the world, or even the local community, and work for about 4 to 5 hours in your garden, or in however you'd like them to be involved in your property, in exchange for food and accommodation. And so there's this whole tribe, I wouldn't say tribe, but almost a nation of young people traveling the world, learning about sustainable living by woofing. Yeah. Because as long as they can get from one place to the next place, they don't really need to spend any money when they're here, and they're they're learning and they're being looked after by a family. I think it's just
it's beautiful.
a fantastic way to be able to travel and also to be able to learn, because it's the kind of stuff that you don't learn at university.
Oh yeah, exactly.
I went through I went through landscape architecture school, and honestly, I didn't touch a plant while I was at landscape architecture school. I understood the form of a plant, and I knew intellectually about how high it would grow and how wide it would be and what color it was, but there was nothing about
interactive,
actually how to grow it, or whether any parts of it were edible. There was nothing about any of that when I went through. So I think that's changed somewhat now. But it's the learning that happened after university for me, by actually sitting down with people in a garden somewhere, in a farm, in a village somewhere, talking and sharing and watching and experimenting, is where that knowledge about how to create really successful permaculture or polycultural systems happened. It's not something necessarily that you can study. I think a lot of the permaculture courses and everything are absolutely fantastic, but mostly they're great at sharing about what are the best questions to ask and how you can explore that idea more, and how different ideas start to connect, to get some basic skills that you can go out with. But it's then what happens after that is where the real education begins, I think, too.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So one of your questions that you sent over was that you've created a debt-free, permaculture-based way of life at Crystal Waters. Can you talk about that? Because for me, that's a really important concept to get across to people.
As a young person, I graduated from from university, and the thing that you're meant to do then is go and get a job.
Yeah. And
so I tried to do that, and I just felt absolutely devastated in that environment, being inside the whole time, supposedly doing sustainable environmental work, but really seeing that I wasn't making much of a contribution. So I felt incredibly stifled. So I left, and I decided that I would create my own work. And what that means is sometimes you're earning some and sometimes you're not. And a lot of my work is also voluntary work. And so my income has always been, enough, but not massive. And there was absolutely no way, in order to build a house, that I would be able to get a loan.
Right.
So from the very outset, as a young person, I decided that I was going to build a house and set myself up, but without borrowing a single cent.
Wow.
And so my husband and I, we would just go out and we'd do some work and we'd bring it back. We just put it back in. So we live incredibly simply, and find ways to just, generate our income through the things that we're passionate about, and just put that back into what we're doing here. And so over a period of 10 years, we built a house in what we call buildable, affordable modules. So the first part of the house was basically a one-bedroom cabin, and we lived in that for a while until I think child number 2 was getting to a point of starting to burst the seams of the room, and then child number 3 was on its way, and we thought, right, time for buildable, affordable module number 2.
Right.
And so we now have some connected pods on our landscape that are all part of a bigger picture. So we had them mapped out in our mind to start with, but so we'd save until we got enough to build the next one. And we built it simply. We built it by ourselves. By building it by ourselves, we cut the cost in half. My dad would come and help us. He was actually probably one of our main building advisors. He's not a builder, but he's always been really practical, and he built his house in Melbourne, and so he was kind of our mentor for that.
Right.
A lot of local resources and local help. And it was fantastic. It's such a beautiful thing to be in a place and know every single detail. A lot of people in the permaculture world have that same feeling because I understand, many people have built their own homes, but if you have, you know what I mean. You can look at it. You can look at a post and go, "Oh, I know what forest that came from, and how that's all put together, and the sense of sort of meaning and purpose in actually constructing something from scratch like that is just fabulous. So it takes also the home out from being a commodity. It's not just a home that's, well, I'll do this to it. I often hear people talking about a house. Well, I'll do this to it because I know that in the future when I sell it, it'll be good for the market value. It's not about the market value. It's about living here as a family. And I kind of the way that it's set up too, I have decided that it's an expanded home so that, when the kids grow up, they can have their own little bit. And we can shut off and separate the house again. We've kind of connected it with a walkway, but we can disconnect it with doorways. So you can have different generations living here. The kids, my kids are now 10, 8, and 3, and they've already decided which bits they're having and which bits I'm having. I've got the little bit up the top.
Yeah.
So we kept going, and I have a little office space that's separate from the house, and where I am now, and so the kids, because we all work from home and we homeschool, so we need those separate spaces too to be able to all operate together. And then I have a little cabin that I've built right at the very top of the block where guests and visitors and woofers come to stay, so they have their independence. And
fantastic. I'm on my way.
Great.
I'm on my way. So for those of us that can't build a house, I'd like to speak to a little bit about, it's really about living more simply, right?
Essentially.
Yeah. And so if for those of us that in the United States that really can't, go about building our own house, what might that look like?
Well, for me, I think it's about looking at, how much money we're spending, what sort of things are we buying, whether we could, quite often, I was just writing a little blog post about this the other day, and I read some research about it. You actually go and spend, if you take cash, if you use cash regularly, you spend 20% less.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah, just simply by that, because you're more aware. It's in your hand.
Yep.
It's in a plastic card. It's sort of, you're not really keeping track of it.
Right.
So that was one thing. Another thing was, I choose to always shop in my little local town rather than heading off to a major big box shopping centre, because it's without doubt that you always come out of those places with stuff you don't need, or stuff that's not really well made necessarily, and it will break quickly. So I always try and find, it's something that I need. If I can't get it secondhand or I can't share it with someone else, then I find a really good quality one as locally as possible, so it supports the local economy. But, so there's not going shopping not having shopping as a hobby.
Right. That's a big thing.
It is a big thing in our culture. I remember growing up, every Friday night we'd head off down to the local shopping centre and we'd just cruise around and look what was there to buy. That was our Friday night, and it took me a while to actually get out of that as now when I go into the big box shopping centres, I feel completely overwhelmed with the sounds and the sights, and actually having a 3-year-old is a really good excuse not to go into those places, because they just become absolutely wild and overstimulated, and it becomes an incredibly stressful thing to do. Right. So I love going to my local town because everyone knows you, and they know the kids, and they all have little kid toy spots set up, so you can have a chat with people while you're getting your hardware or while you're getting your local veggies, and that's a really nice thing to do. Yeah. But one of the basic and obvious things too is growing as much food as you can. I've surrounded my house, walk straight off the veranda, and there's all the salad greens and the herbs and vegetables and fruits, and to be able to just roll out your door and forage for food.
Isn't that nice?
But do it in a simple way. I love the kind of the polycultural gardens where there's just so many perennial plants and self-seeding plants that, we live in the subtropics here, so there's always something growing, and it's just a fabulous thing to kind of discover what's coming up. I focus on really building up the soil so that there's always something self-seeding, and you're wandering through round past the bananas, and then you discover, oh my gosh, look, there's a passion fruit coming up out of there, and it's this sense of wildness that it is a cultivated ecology. It has become an ecological system. It looks after itself, and through growing in that way, I literally would spend a maximum of 5 minutes a day, I think, doing maintenance work, and spend most of my time just enjoying the garden and
harvesting.
That's right. So it's become an absolute delight, and I think it's a great example too. And I really focused on doing that because a lot of the things I hear people say about, if I had more time, I could do some gardening.
Right.
And so what I've tried to show is how you could garden an abundant garden and have, little time, little water. And I actually don't water my garden from day to day. It's a rare thing to actually water it. I've really focused on the soil and collecting the rain and redirecting runoff from anywhere that might be coming down into the garden, and planting appropriate species too, not expecting to grow things that might grow in Melbourne or, in a different climate, in my climate.
Yeah. And
learning to like different foods or different parts of foods. I mean, just as a simple example, the pumpkin will just in and of itself start to sprawl out across your garden. Now, the pumpkin leaves are also edible. The pumpkin shoots are edible. The pumpkin flowers are edible. And so you don't need to wait until the actual pumpkin itself is ready. And then once it is, you can obviously eat, you can eat the skin as well as the flesh and the seeds. One of our loveliest snacks is to actually just wash off the pulp of the seeds and put it in a sandwich press and toast them until and that only takes a minute. And then put a little bit of tamari soy sauce on it, and it's just a fabulous treat. It's so nice. And then if you walk through your garden, if you have carrots, I mean, the young carrot tops are edible. If you've got beetroots, the beetroot tops are actually far more nutritious than the beetroots themselves. If you're growing snow peas, you can eat the pea shoots and the pea leaves and the pea flowers. Most of the flowers of all of the edible species, except for, the solanaceae, the tomatoes and eggplants, they're all edible too. It's kind of funny. I had a group. I run this thing called the Earth School, which is a program for high school students where they come in and I'm walking through the garden just foraging and eating and flower, and I just see the look on their face or the jaws drop as I'm shoving flowers. And it was kind of exciting though. The other day when I had them up here, they started to say, "Oh, can I try that?" So here I'm handing out bits of mustard spinaches and garlic chive flowers and all sorts of things, and they were tasting them and they got so excited by it. And one of the last things I did was run a program to teach them how to propagate, so that if they ever see any plants that they want to propagate, they could just take a snip and do it. So I sent them home with a whole bundle load of plants. I actually think that one of my biggest products out of my garden, apart from food for myself, one is education. I've set it up as an educational garden. So I've tried to create a space that will inspire people to go home and do it themselves. But the other one is cuttings. I go and do a lot of community education work, and I load my car up with as many cuttings of plants that I can possibly fit. So I think in the last year I've given out 10,000 cuttings of edible perennial plants.
Wow.
As I've done the talks, and just said, look, here's the materials, come up at the end of the talk, and I'll snip it up as finely as I can into all different cuttings, take it home, plant it, on the proviso that when it starts to grow,
you're going to share
invite people to do the same.
Yeah,
just keep them going out. Growing food doesn't have to be an expensive thing. If we share and we teach other people how to do it and become knowledgeable, because I think, we've kind of lost a lot of that. We think if we set up a garden, we have to buy expensive edgings and buy in all the soil and buy all the plants. And before you know it, it's $1,000 or more. And then you might only grow a few. A tomato or a cabbage that gets eaten, and people go, "Oh, this is so frustrating." So I've kind of tried to bring it back into really simple strategies of how to create gardens using all natural recycled materials, even without edgings.
Beautiful.
And without having to spend a lot of money, and then creating an absolute abundance. But it's abundant thinking that I think we need to work on, not just the physical abundance. Because there's so much that's around us all the time, both in, there's ideas, there's people energy, there's natural resources, waste. Waste is a huge resource in our societies because, how much do we throw away every year? I've set up my little carport as a depository for the local community to put in things like newspapers, milk bottles, egg cartons. I mean, we have a little cow cooperative here at Crystal Water, so I actually don't buy much milk. I like to use the milk containers. I chop them in half and turn them upside down, and they become my self-watering pots for propagating up plants.
Exactly.
And so I ask everyone, rather than putting it in the recycling bin, look, give it to me and I'll
Reuse
use them.
it. Yeah.
And I go down and I run workshops for kids, and I send them all off with their milk bottle gardens and and the egg cartons too. That I make them into little seedling trays, and I do that with the children too. And whatever I have left, I feed to the worms. And because I have chooks, I don't have egg cartons either. So I ask people around the neighbourhood to use my carport as their depository a newspaper.
Nice. Yeah.
I don't buy newspapers because I get all my news.
Yep.
I subscribe to Good News, which is all the online permaculture type of things. It's kind of an interesting way to think about. It's good to hear what's going on in the world, but it's also good not to fill your brain with all the sensationalist bad news
Garbage.
all the time.
Yeah, exactly.
And so I've avoided getting newspapers, but except for the ones that are the second-hand used ones that I collect in my carport and use as mulch in the garden.
Nice.
One of the biggest things I like to do is to actually put them down. I sort of loosen the soil, put down compost, then I put the newspaper on top, and then the mulch is my weed barrier.
Right.
It's kind of no-dig garden, but turned on its head. Most people put the newspaper on the ground and then put compost on top. But I really think that the soil organisms would much prefer to have a nice feed of compost on their heads rather than newspaper.
Yeah.
So I always put the compost down first and then cover it with the newspaper. And that way, any weeds that are in the compost too just get smothered. So I don't have a weeding issue in my garden. It just takes a huge effort out of growing as well. So yeah.
Wow. That's
Sorry, I get a bit excited when
I love it. That's an amazing life you have down under.
Yeah.
Down under. So
and then homeschooling the kids in amongst all of that too, and I just see that they just know this stuff. They just feel it and are it. They're not going to have to learn about sustainability or learn about gardening. They're just in it and do it, and they feel it, and they've been listening, I guess, a lot to me as I talk through my garden with lots of groups, and it's interesting. They often come and help me do the tours now, and the other day they were following around behind me and kept going, "But Mama, you forgot to say about the..."
Nice.
They know the script there.
Nice.
So then I hand the baton to them and let them continue the conversation and allow them to be teachers right from that young age, because I think the earlier you start to share your knowledge, and the more you speak it, the more it becomes you understand it more if you have to share it. And we do lots of really great homeschool projects. I mentioned the one about my son. He does he's getting into the making the electric solar plug-in electric vehicle. He also started a worm farmery, because one of the things that people are really getting excited about is worm towers here, embedding them directly into your garden.
Yep.
So he's making little worm towers and bundling up worms to make worm starter kits. And he put them down at the our local Crystal Waters market last month. We have a monthly market. And he sold out within half an hour.
Oh, nice.
He's 8 and he's got this fantastic worm enterprise happening already. My daughter, on the other hand, she's passionate about cooking and growing. And so she started up a pop-up cafe at the top of our block. We clear out the carport and so she harvests things from our garden. She makes lovely garden teas, sugar-free, organic, orange cakes and things like that base. We've got oranges coming out of our ears at the moment. So she finds what's on at the moment and uses that. But she does it in a way that's a social enterprise and environmentally supportive. So she's passionate about species and species extinction and worried about that. And so what she does is, when she earns some money, she donates that money to support the protection of endangered species. And then another proportion of it goes to doing like tree planting at Crystal Waters to help create a more koala-friendly place, and and then she keeps a little bit for herself. So she, like she's learning maths and she's learning, design and all these different sorts of things through doing a really practical project like that. It's exciting to see, and they're just so I don't have to teach them stuff. I just facilitating their learning and pointing them in the right direction. And when I first started homeschooling, I was trying to do the teacher thing, and it was a battle. It really was a battle. But when I let go of my expectations, I suppose, of what I was meant to be doing, and let them be the directors of it, it became obvious that how to do it. So I just follow their lead, and then get up with a whole lot of extra direction and information, point to it that they can find themselves. And it's an exciting way to live. And I guess the fact is that having a debt-free way of life gives me the chance to do that, because I can work part-time.
Yes, exactly.
To earn enough money to keep us going. And then and my husband does the same, and so then together we tag team in the homeschooling, and it just works. It's just fabulous.
A friend of mine does something like this, but he's calling it something else. He's calling it unschooling.
Well, there's that. Someone once asked me on some Facebook thing, "Are you unschooling or homeschooling?" And I went, "Oh, I didn't know there was a difference."
Yeah, exactly.
I was then duly told the difference between it. That homeschooling here, the definition I think is meant to mean, if you're being particular, it's where you have a curriculum that you follow. We have something called distance education here in Australia. So you sign up to that, you get a curriculum, and your kids are on the computer most of the day and doing home school. So it's school at home. Right. Whereas unschooling, you're right, it is actually probably the better term for it, because it's not a curriculum. The children are learning an amazing. They actually learn. I think they learn quicker through unschooling. Yeah. Because, for example, one of the projects that the kids were working on last term was a treehouse design, and so my son was going, well, so how do I work out how long that piece of tin is if I need to have a slope of this angle so that the water will run off into a tank? I want to collect water off my treehouse.
Beautiful.
And so then we had to start looking at different formulas, and we went in and explored that. Now, that formula and that way of thinking is going to stick in his mind far more than if he sat and learnt the formula as an abstracted concept in the classroom. It's connected, and that's the key part of this. It's the connectedness, and it's the opportunity for them to really create very sound and solid pathways in their brain, I think, because it's everything they learn has many connections, so it really sticks far more. Right. I'm so excited by it. I hope that they continue to homeschool through. I didn't actually choose for them to homeschool, although I wanted to. I just don't think I was brave enough to start with. They did go to a little local school, which I thought was great at the time. It had 85 kids for the whole school, and it was multi-age classes and all sorts of things. But they got to the point where they asked to be homeschooled, that they were really just wanted to come out and do this sort of way of schooling. Right. So, beautiful. Don't ask me. I knew about that, but anyway.
Yeah. So I'm gonna shift on you, and I'd like for you to talk about a time you failed, how you overcame that failure, and what you might have learned from it.
Well, I think one of the things I've been trying to start recently is a farm. Educational farm here at the centre of Crystal Waters, and it's still something. I mean, it's a sort of a recent failure, I suppose. I've taken a lease on the land, but the whole thing's been sitting there for 2 years. I seem to be able to be one of those people who just keep saying yes to every project that comes, and I take on. So I literally stay up to 2 or 3 o'clock every night. Working on projects and documenting things and preparing things, and then I get up 6 or 7 in the morning with the kids, and I do the whole thing, and I have so many ideas that some of them just flop, and I'm learning to accept that that's not necessarily a failure. It's maybe just an idea that hasn't had its time yet. Yeah. So this farm idea, I'd set it up so that there would be it would be a place where people could come and be interns or apprentices in permaculture. So you've done your permaculture course, now you want to learn some more, come and live at Crystal Waters for a period of time and explore eco-village living, permaculture. We'll do sustainable building workshops, we'll do all of these things. I just haven't been able to get it off the ground. And but I'm still holding on to it.
Of course.
But, I've parked it as an idea and not feeling so disappointed that I have failed at creating that. Because I was starting to get inquiries from around the world about, can I come and be an intern? And I'd have to keep disappointing and say, oh, we'll start it soon. And it's just not.
It's a process.
Exactly.
It's a process.
And, so I've pulled back and just gone, okay, well, I have the garden here. This is my farm at the moment, just on a smaller scale. And that's probably my most recent failure. There's lots of mini failures all the way.
Of course, but that's how we learn.
They're all learning experiences, aren't they?
Yeah, that is the case.
Yeah.
So what do you consider your biggest success?
Well, I love the garden and the house that I've been able to create here. In terms of it being an education and demonstration space too, of the possibilities that could be. And we even got a little award for it being a edible landscape award.
Nice.
I think my biggest success would be starting up a place called Northey Street City Farm in Brisbane, in the heart of the city. It's a 4-acre permaculture farm right in the heart of Brisbane.
Nice.
And it's a sustainability hub. It's a place where people come and learn about it's an oasis. You kind of step into that space and all of a sudden you're out of the city and in permaculture world, and it just feels different, and it is different. It has a whole culture around it, and it's a place, it's the only organic farmers market is based at that city farm, and it's been going for 25 years now, almost.
Wow.
And my husband and I started that place with a couple of other people. It was the first thing we did when we finished our permaculture design course. We met up with some people and said, we got to get a place started right in here. I think that's the key thing about permaculture design courses, is they inspire people to take action.
Yeah.
Find ways in their local community that they can actually make a difference. If it's not happening, how can you, activate something to happen? And,
right.
We started really small, but this place, we had a really big vision. And it's amazing to go back now because, like I said, I've been up here at Crystal Waters for 18 years. But the first 4 or 5 years of getting the Northey Street City Farm started were just so important, I think, in my education as well. I was still in my 20s, and I came out of landscape architecture school, but I always thought landscape architecture, from how I was taught, it was about designing for people. You'd come in and you'd design a landscape and it would be implemented.
Right.
Whereas the community garden model and the city farm model is about designing with people. So instead of becoming a designer, I became a design facilitator and design educator. And I actually didn't tell anyone at that point that I was a landscape architect because I felt that there would be that deference to the expert.
Yes.
You know what you're talking about. So I kind of stepped out of that role and became part of that group, but helped to kind of facilitate it in a way, and that became a really important lesson for me about how to activate communities, how to work with programs to make them sustainable. That if as many people as possible were involved in the development, the creation, the visioning of a place, that there would be that deep and ongoing connection. It wouldn't just be. And I see it now even still when a community garden project gets started and it's designed by the council and constructed by, a local contractor, and they say, okay, we've got the garden ready for you, community, come and use it. And they wonder why
shows up.
No one's really turning up, and what's wrong? We create a space for you. And it's about that, a connection. Again, I always come back to connection. The more rich the fabric of connections are, and the more connected people feel to a place or to a process of being in a or connected to a community, the more likely it is that it's going to be a successful project and have a long life.
Right.
Yeah.
So what drives you?
I think what I was saying earlier about feeling the pain and the injustice of, like it hurts me when I see, our earth being destroyed, and it hurts me when I see, societies being, and cultures being dismantled and destroyed, and I always feel like, well, there has to be another way. What is another way that we can live where we're actually, regenerating the earth and restoring cultures to sustainability? And what does that society look like? And so it's that sense of, I don't know, hope and positivity, but based on that thing, like, it's just not right. It's not right what's happening now. Why? There has to be another way, I think, is where I keep coming back to, and reimagining the future, being able to see what is the sort of future that we'd like to create, and then finding ways to move towards it, not just kind of randomly taking steps but just really being quite, I don't know, working with communities to help create a vision for a better future, I suppose, and one where we're supporting the flourishing of earth systems and allowing, all life to flourish in the way that it's meant to, human and other. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Oh, perfect. It is beautiful. Beautifully said. Beautifully said. And I'm all about education, and I have to know, is there one book that has been influential for your life in this process?
Can I tell you a couple?
Please, bring it on.
Well, as I was mentioning earlier too, when I was about in my early 20s, I was starting to read, or probably even my late teens, I was starting to read a lot about sustainable ways of thinking, and I came across Fritjof Capra, and his book, The Turning Point, I think was a turning point in my life. As I was reading it, I went on a retreat by myself down to the lakes area in Victoria, and just took a pile of books with me, and most of them were written by Fritjof Capra. And I don't know, literally there were sparks flying out of my brain. It was at night time, and I'm pretty sure the room was lit by this just the sparks of connection happening out of me. And then I kept following all the links that were in his books, and that set me off on an amazing path. But another book that really inspired me too was a book by Helena Norberg Hodge called Ancient Futures, and looking at how the culture of Ladakh was a sustainable culture, and how that worked, and how they were so deeply connected to place and to community and to each other, and the spirit of place. But then also contrasting that very clearly with what we're doing in the West, and what our way of life is doing to cultures like that. But I think that just the direct comparison showed me some of the fundamental flaws in the thinking and the assumptions that we have. And so it was a really clear comparison for me, and also a way it helped me to really sort of shape some of my thinking of the ways forward. So those two books, The Turning Point by Fritjof Capra and Ancient Futures by Helena Norberg Hodge, I think were really, really formative in my my way of thinking.
Beautiful. So what one final piece of advice you have for our listeners?
I think it's, always be open to listen and to learn, to be that, to be green, like I said before, when you're green, you grow, and when you're ripe, you rot. To stay green and to listen, to learn, but then as quickly as possible to start sharing it, and to do it, and to teach it, and to write it. And I think as much as possible that we can share out the positive vision and invite people to share it with you, that you don't have to be the expert before you start sharing.
Yeah, big
that
time.
You can bring people along on that journey with you. So listen, learn, and just do it.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us on the show and sharing your experience with us today, Morag. It's been a treat chatting with you.
Oh, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for inviting me, Greg.
Oh my gosh, this has been a delightful conversation. So how can our listeners find out more and get a hold of you?
I write a little blog called Our Permaculture Life, So that's our-permaculture-life.blogspot.com.
Okay.
And so I kind of share stories of my life on that. But I also I run a not-for-profit foundation called the Ethos Foundation. And that shares all the different sorts of programs. I run permaculture life workshops for adults and nature kids workshops and young ethos scholars for young leaders and a whole range of things there. And it also talks a bit about crystal waters on that site too. So that's ethosfoundation.org. And all my contact details are on those two sites.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Well, that's it for today. Thanks for joining us on the Urban Farm Podcast. Decades ago, I started growing food in my front and backyard, and I realized that my mission in life is to inspire and empower others to grow their own nutrient-dense, healthy organic food. Because of this, a lot of people have come to me with their gardening questions over the years, and that got me thinking, what if we put together a community that would help budding gardeners blossom? So I finally made the idea a reality with my Urban Farm U member program. Each month, your membership includes 3 live online events, a monthly class, a chit-chat with an expert, and a monthly coaching session, plus access to the experts on our member page and a significant discount on our signature courses. I'm deeply committed to transforming our global food system, and I do this by empowering you to grow your own food. The Urban Farm membership program is a simple way to get going. Please join me in transforming your food system today. To learn more, go to urbanfarmmembership.org or text membership to 33444. That's urbanfarmmembership.org or text membership to 33444.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode of the Urban Farm Podcast. Remember to listen 3 days a week for tips, advice, and resources to help you on your journey with urban farming. You can find us on the web at urbanfarm.org or send us an email to podcast@urbanfarm.org. In the words of Vincent van Gogh, great things are done by a series of small things brought together. Be encouraged that with each lesson learned and skill developed, you are one step closer in the direction of your dreams.